I wasn't even suspicious at first. That's the worst part. I was just living my life, going to work, coming home, cooking dinner with Grace, and thinking about our future together. We had been trying for a baby for 3 years, 3 long, frustrating years of disappointment and doctor visits. It was hard, but we were in it together. Or so I thought. Then I found the pills. It was a stupid accident. I was looking for some Advil in her drawer when I saw a little silver pack shoved in the back. At first, my brain didn't register what it was. Then it hit me like a truck: birth control pills. The same ones she told me she stopped taking years ago. I just stood there, holding them, my heart pounding. Maybe there was some explanation. Maybe they were old. Maybe I was an idiot. That night, I casually brought up the idea of getting her a new prescription for prenatal vitamins. "We should make sure you're taking all the right stuff," I said, watching her reaction. She smiled at me, all sweet and innocent. "Oh, I actually already got some last month. I've been taking them every day." Lie. Right to my face. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and let it go. For the moment. But something inside me had shifted. My wife, the woman I trusted with everything, was lying to me. And I needed to find out why. After that night, I started paying closer attention. Not in a paranoid way, just watching. And the more I watched, the more little things started to feel off. For one, Grace had been working late a lot. It didn't seem weird at first because her job had busy seasons, and this wasn't the first time she had put in extra hours. But then I noticed how inconsistent her stories were. One night, she said she stayed late to finish a report for her boss. The next night, she said she stayed because of a team meeting. A few days later, she mentioned her boss had been out of town all week. That didn't add up. So I tested her. I casually asked, "How's your boss been since she got back?" Grace hesitated for half a second, just a tiny pause, then smiled and said, "Oh, she's been super stressed. You know how she is." Lie. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. I didn't confront her. I didn't yell or accuse. Instead, I started keeping track. Every time she said she was staying late, I jotted down the date and time. Every time her story changed, I made a mental note. And I started watching her phone, not in a creepy way, just noticing when she got texts, when she stepped away to take calls, how she'd tilt her screen away from me. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But deep down I already knew. I just didn't know how bad it really was. A week later, I decided to push things a little further. Grace had mentioned she'd be working late again on Friday. That was fine. I acted like I didn't care. But when she left for work that morning, I checked the mileage on her car. Just a quick glance. Nothing obvious. Then I went about my day like normal. That night, I waited. She was supposed to be at work until 9 p.m., but I had this feeling, this deep, nagging feeling in my gut that wouldn't let me sit still. So around 7:30, I took a drive by her office. Her car wasn't there. I didn't panic, not yet. I figured maybe she parked somewhere else. Maybe she ran an errand. But something told me to check anyway. So I drove around. And that's when I saw it. Her car, parked outside a small Italian restaurant on the other side of town. A place we used to go to for date nights, back when things were good. At first, I thought maybe she's with coworkers? Maybe it's an office dinner? But then I saw her. Through the window, sitting in a cozy little booth. And she wasn't alone. I leaned forward trying to get a better look. My heart was hammering in my chest. But from where I was, I could only see her, laughing, smiling, looking happier than she had in months. I didn't recognize the person sitting across from her. Not yet. I wasn't ready to know. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing. Who the hell was she with? A coworker? Some random guy? I needed to know. So I got out of my car and crossed the street. I didn't storm and didn't make a scene. I just walked up to the restaurant window and found a spot where I could see them clearly. And then my whole world cracked open. It wasn't some young guy. It wasn't a coworker. It was my grandfather. I actually blinked a few times, thinking maybe I was seeing things wrong. But no, it was him. My grandfather, Joseph, 71 years old, sitting across from my wife, grinning like he had won the lottery. I felt sick. They weren't touching, not yet, but their body language told me everything. The way she leaned in, the way he looked at her. It wasn't a casual dinner. It wasn't family catching up. It was intimate, secretive. I wanted to barge in right then and there, demand answers, demand to know how the hell this even started. But I didn't. Instead, I turned around, walked back to my car, and drove home. Because this wasn't the kind of betrayal you react to in the heat of the moment. This needed planning. I barely remembered driving home. My hands were shaking the whole way. My mind running in 1,000 directions at once. My grandfather. Out of all the people in the world, it was him. I sat in my car in the driveway for a long time, just staring at my house. The home Grace and I built together. The home where we had been trying for a baby. Where I spent nights rubbing her back after failed pregnancy tests. Where we had whispered about names and nursery colors. And the whole time, she was sneaking around with him. I wanted to storm in and scream at her the second she got home. I wanted to flip the table, throw her stuff out the door, make her feel as small as she had just made me feel. But I didn't. I needed more than anger. I needed proof. The first move. By the time she walked in at 9:15 p.m., exactly on time, like she hadn't been on a secret date with my grandfather just an hour ago, I had calmed myself down enough to play it cool. "Hey," she said, dropping her purse by the door. She looked tired, a little flushed. "Long day?" I nodded, watching her closely. "Yeah? How was work?" She sighed dramatically. "Brutal. My boss made me redo the whole report because she suddenly changed her mind about what she wanted. I barely had time to eat. Lie. I watched her have a full meal with my grandfather. I saw her smiling, laughing. But I just nodded. That sucks. Want me to make you something? She waved me off. No, I just want to shower and sleep. And just like that, she walked past me like everything was normal. Like she wasn't living a double life. Like she wasn't carrying on an affair with my own flesh and blood. I sat there, staring at the floor, feeling my stomach churn. I had been prepared for her to lie, but hearing it come out of her mouth so effortlessly, like it was nothing, made me realize something. She had probably been lying for a long time, digging deeper. The next day, I took action. I started by checking her phone, not physically, because she always kept it locked. But I watched how she used it. I noticed she turned its screen side down when she was around me. I noticed how she checked it in the bathroom, how she smiled at messages but never shared what they were. So I got creative. I told her I needed to update our home Wi-Fi and asked for her phone to check something. She hesitated just for a second, but then handed it over. I pretended to type something while quickly checking her recent calls. There it was, a call from my grandfather. Just yesterday. She snatched the phone back before I could check her messages, laughing like I was some idiot who didn't know how routers worked. "You're so bad with tech," she teased, shoving her phone into her pocket. But she was nervous. I saw it. I just smiled and let it go, because now I knew for sure. The next slip-up. Over the next few days, I kept playing dumb, watching her lies stack up like a house of cards. I even acted extra sweet, pretending to be the clueless, doting husband. I told her I was thinking about taking a couple of days off work so we could spend time together. She panicked. "Oh, babe, I wish, but work is just crazy right now," she said quickly. Like, crazy. I might even need to work the weekend. Lie. I had already checked. Her office was closed on weekends. Still, I nodded, pretending to understand. "Of course. We'll plan something later." She looked relieved, and I felt disgusted, tracking her movements. I wasn't going to just sit around waiting for her to slip up again. I needed concrete evidence. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I put a tracker in her car. It was easy. Just a cheap little GPS device I ordered online. Slipped it under her driver's seat when she was in the shower. And then I waited. That Friday, she worked late again. But when I checked the tracker, she wasn't at her office. She was at my grandfather's house. I sat there, staring at the screen, watching as the her car, stayed parked there for 2 whole hours. I felt something inside me snap. This wasn't just some fling. This was something serious. A plan forms. That night, when she came home, I didn't say anything. Just kissed her on the forehead like the loving, oblivious husband I was pretending to be. But in my head, I was already planning how to destroy them both. By this point, I wasn't just angry, I was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes right before a storm. I wasn't going to lash out blindly. No, that wasn't enough. Grace and my own grandfather had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and they were comfortable lying to my face about it. I was going to make them regret it, making her think she's winning. The next morning, I decided to push things a little further. I leaned into my role as the clueless husband. I was thinking we should do something special soon, I told Grace over breakfast. Maybe a little weekend getaway? She was in the middle of sipping her coffee and nearly choked. I mean, that sounds great, but I don't think I can. Work is still crazy. Right? I nodded, pretending to be disappointed. I just miss you, you know? Feels like we barely see each other. I saw the guilt flash across her face for just a second before she covered it up with a fake smile. I know, babe. I miss you too. But this project should wrap up soon, and then we can plan something. Lies. I smiled, kissed her cheek, and let her think she had successfully fooled me. That was the key. I needed her to feel safe. Like she wasn't under suspicion. Like I was still the dumb husband who had no idea what was going on. Because the second she let her guard down, that's when I'd strike. Laying the bait. That night, I casually mentioned that I had a work trip coming up next weekend. A total lie, of course, but she didn't know that. Her reaction? Way too eager. Oh, that's a shame, she said, barely hiding her excitement. How long will you be gone? Just a couple of days, I said, watching her closely. Leaving Friday morning, back Sunday night. She nodded, looking way too happy for someone whose husband was about to be away. Well, I'll miss you. Sure you will. Now, if Grace and my grandfather were really using my absences to meet up, then this was the perfect opportunity for them. I knew exactly what they'd do. And that's exactly why I left a hidden camera in our bedroom before I left for my fake trip. The sting operation. Friday morning, I kissed Grace goodbye, grabbed my suitcase, filled with nothing but old clothes, and pretended to leave for the airport. I even drove to a friend's house to make it look real. Then I waited. By 6 p.m., I checked the tracker I had hidden in her car. She was already on the move. And where was she going? Straight to my grandfather's house. I clenched my fists, but forced myself to stay focused. I needed undeniable proof before I confronted them. The evidence I needed. At 11 p.m., she came home. I knew she thought she had gotten away with it. Probably showered, slid into bed, and slept peacefully, while I was out there watching every single move she made. The next morning, while she was still sleeping, I checked the hidden camera footage. And there it was. Not even 10 minutes after I left, she had called my grandfather. And then she did something that made my stomach turn. She giggled. A soft, flirty little laugh. He's gone, baby. The whole weekend. I had to pause the video because my hands were shaking so bad. I pressed play again. She changed into something revealing. Did her hair. Put on perfume. Stuff she hadn't done for me in months. Then she practically skipped out the door. I shut off the video. I didn't need to watch any more. I had enough. The breaking point. That night I acted normal. We ate dinner together. We watched a movie. She curled up next to me on the couch like nothing was wrong. And that's when I realized something. She wasn't just a liar. She was a damn good one. She didn't feel bad. She didn't feel guilty. She had been doing this for months, maybe longer, and I had been blind to it. But not anymore. Now, Now it was time to destroy them both. I spent the next few days perfecting my plan. It wasn't enough to just confront them. No, I wanted them to feel exposed, humiliated, and powerless. I wanted everyone to know what they had done. So, I made sure to collect every piece of evidence I could. The GPS tracker logs, the call records, the hidden camera footage, screenshots of texts from my grandfather's number, because, of course, I found a way to check those too. The messages were disgusting. Things no grandfather should ever say to his grandson's wife. It took everything in me not to explode right then and there. But I waited, because the perfect opportunity was coming. The family gathering. Every few months, my family gets together for a big dinner. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone shows up. And this time, it was being hosted at my grandfather's house. Perfect. I told Grace I was looking forward to it. We should go together, I said, acting like I was just a sweet, unsuspecting husband. She hesitated, but only for a second. Then she smiled. Yeah, of course. That sounds nice. Nice. Sure. I kept my cool, but inside I was grinning like a damn psychopath. Because this was where everything would come crashing down. The big reveal. Saturday night. We drove to my grandfather's house like everything was normal. Grace had her hand on my knee in the car, talking about some new show she wanted us to watch together. Like she wasn't sneaking off to sleep with my own flesh and blood. It was sickening. When we got there, the house was packed. Everyone was drinking, laughing, catching up. My grandfather was at the grill, playing the role of loving family man. I wanted to punch his face in, but I had a better plan. After dinner, when everyone was relaxed and full, I stood up and tapped my glass. I just want to say a few words, I announced. People turned toward me, smiling. My grandfather grinned, raising his beer. Go ahead, Johnny boy. I nodded, keeping my expression calm. I just want to talk about family, about loyalty, about how the people closest to you should be the ones you trust the most. I glanced at Grace. She smiled at me, completely oblivious. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. Time to end this. I've always believed that love and trust go hand in hand. But sometimes, I paused, looking directly at my grandfather now. Sometimes, the people you trust the most are the ones stabbing you in the back. Confused murmurs filled the room. Grace shifted uncomfortably in her seat. My grandfather's smile faltered. I pressed a button on my phone, and the TV lit up. A video started playing. Grace, on the phone, giggling. He's gone, baby. The whole weekend. The room went silent. Then more footage. Her checking her hair in the mirror, putting on perfume, practically skipping out the door like a lovesick teenager. Someone gasped. My aunt, actually, dropped her drink. Grace went pale. John. I raised a hand. Wait. There's more. Then came the texts. Messages between Grace and my own grandfather. Disgusting, explicit messages. Promises. Plans. Love. People were whispering now. My grandfather's face had gone red. Grace looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I turned to her. How long? I asked, my voice calm. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I turned to my grandfather. How long? Nothing. Then my grandfather, the coward, shoved his chair back and actually tried to leave the room. I laughed. Yeah, run away. That's what pathetic people like you do, right? Someone grabbed his arm. My uncle, I think. What the hell is this? I didn't even look at him. My eyes were on Grace. You spent years lying to me, I said, voice cold. While I held you through every failed pregnancy test. While I planned a future with you. And the whole time, you were sneaking off with my grandfather. She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. John, I swear, I shook my head. No, you don't get to talk. You had months, maybe years, to tell me the truth. But instead you let me be the idiot in the dark. You let me love you while you betrayed me in the worst way possible. I let that sink in. Let her feel every single ounce of shame that she should have felt from the beginning. Then I picked up my drink, took a sip, and walked out. Behind me? Chaos. Shouting. My mother screaming at my grandfather. My cousins whispering in shock. Grace sobbing. But I didn't care. Because I had won. And this was just the beginning. I drove home in silence. No music, no thoughts, just the hum of the engine and the weight of everything that had just happened. My phone was vibrating nonstop. Calls. Messages. From family. From Grace. Even from my grandfather. I didn't answer a single one. When I pulled into the driveway, I just sat there for a minute, staring at the house I once thought was ours. Then I got out, walked inside, and locked the door. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Grace. I let it ring. Then, a message popped up. Please talk to me. We can fix this. I stared at it for a long time. Then, finally, I typed back. There is no we anymore. And then, I blocked her. Blocking Grace didn't stop her. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of pounding on my door. I already knew who it was before I even checked. I took my time getting up, making coffee, and letting her stand out there in the cold. When I finally opened the door, Grace looked like a wreck. Her hair was a mess, her eyes were red and swollen, and she was still wearing the same clothes from last night. John, please, she whispered. Just talk to me. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Talk? About what? About how you were sleeping with my grandfather behind my back. About how you lied to my face for months. She flinched but kept pushing. It wasn't like that. I never meant to hurt you. I laughed. Actually laughed. You never meant to hurt me? Then what the hell did you think was going to happen when I found out? Tears welled up in her eyes again. I shook my head. You know what? I don't even care anymore. Go cry somewhere else. And with that, I slammed the door in her face. Grace didn't leave right away. I stood by the door, hearing her breathing heavily on the other side. Then, after a few seconds, a weak knock. John, please, she said, voice cracking. I didn't answer. Another knock. More frantic this time. Just let me explain. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. She didn't deserve my anger. Not yet. Instead, I opened the door just a crack and looked at her. Explain what? How you were sneaking around with my own grandfather. How you kissed me goodbye and ran straight into his arms. She shook her head violently, stepping forward like she was going to grab me. But I didn't move. I just watched her squirm. It wasn't like that, she whispered. I was confused. It just happened. I let out a slow, cold laugh. It just happened? Oh, okay. So one day, you accidentally tripped and fell into my grandfather's bed? That makes total sense. She burst into tears. Ugly, shaking, snot-filled crying. But I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. I was lonely, she sobbed. You were always so busy with work and we were struggling. And I don't know, John, I made a mistake. A horrible mistake. I tilted my head. How long? Her lip trembled. What? I took a step closer, lowering my voice. How long? Her whole body was shaking. A year? I let that sink in. A whole damn year. Wow, I muttered. That's not a mistake, Grace. That's a full-blown relationship. She covered her face, like she couldn't stand to see my expression. I didn't want this to happen, she whispered. I love you, John. I swear I do. I stepped back into the house. You love me? She nodded quickly, eyes hopeful. Yes. Yes, I do. I smiled. A slow, cold smile. Then why were you still taking birth control? Her face went blank. I had her. You said you wanted a baby. I continued, watching her panic. We spent 3 years trying. But I found the pills, Grace. You never even stopped. Why? Her breathing got faster. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I waited. And then, finally, she whispered, I was scared. Scared of what? She swallowed hard. Scared of being tied down. Scared of things getting worse between us. Scared of. I knew what she wasn't saying. Scared of getting pregnant with my child while she was sleeping with someone else. And that was it. That was the final nail in the coffin. I nodded slowly. That's all I needed to know. Then I shut the door in her face. Again. This time, she didn't knock. She just stood there crying. And I let her. Grace finally left after about 10 minutes, but I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And I was right. That afternoon, while I was sitting on my couch, my grandfather called me. I stared at the screen, watching his name flash across my phone. My fingers twitched, tempted to answer, just to hear what kind of excuse he'd try to pull. But I let it ring. Then a text came through. "John, we need to talk. Please." I exhaled slowly, rolling my neck. He needed to talk? What? Was he going to tell me he didn't mean it? That it just happened? That it was all a mistake? I wasn't interested in his excuses. But I was interested in one thing. Why? So I called him back. The line barely rang once before he picked up. "John," he started, his voice heavy, like he was some wise old man carrying a burden. "Son, listen. You don't get to call me that." I cut in, my voice ice cold. Silence. I continued. "You slept with my wife. My wife, Granddad. And you have the nerve to call me like we're about to have a heart-to-heart?" He sighed. "I didn't mean for this to happen." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, right. It just happened, huh? You two really rehearsed this excuse, didn't you?" "John, I know you're angry, but—" I cut him off again. "Angry? No. See, angry is when someone cuts you off in traffic. Angry is when your football team loses in the last minute. I'm not angry, Granddad. I'm done." "John, please," he tried again. "Let's just sit down and talk like men." That did it. I stood up, gripping the phone so tight my knuckles ached. "Talk like men? You mean like a real man? Because last I checked, real men don't steal their grandson's wife." More silence. I let out a slow breath, forcing my voice to stay steady. "You know what? Maybe we should talk. Face to face." He hesitated. That's a good idea." "Yeah," I agreed. "How about we meet at your place? I'll be there in an hour." I heard him swallow. "All right." Then I hung up. And just like that, the next phase of my plan was in motion. An hour later, I pulled up to my grandfather's house, my stomach a tight knot of rage and control. I wasn't here for closure. I was here to watch him squirm. When I knocked, it took him a few seconds to open the door. And when he did, I almost laughed. He looked nervous. "Good. Come in," he said, stepping aside. I didn't. I just stood there, looking him up and down. He wasn't the strong, confident man I remembered growing up. He looked small, weak. I tilted my head. "Why?" He sighed heavily, rubbing a hand over his face. "I don't know." I scoffed. "You don't know? That's the best you've got." He swallowed. "John, I never meant for this to happen." I held up a hand. "Stop saying that. You don't accidentally sleep with your grandson's wife. You chose this." Repeatedly. For over a year. His face twisted in guilt, but I didn't care. He didn't deserve to feel bad. He deserved to be destroyed. "You're my grandfather," I said, my voice low. "You're supposed to be someone I look up to. Someone who teaches me about life. Instead, you became the man who took everything from me." His eyes dropped to the floor. "I didn't want to hurt you." I smiled coldly. "You keep saying that like it changes anything." He didn't answer. I took a deep breath, stepping closer. "So, tell me, was she worth it?" He flinched. I leaned in, dropping my voice even lower. "You threw away your entire family for her. Do you think anyone will look at you the same after this? Do you think they'll forgive you?" He stayed silent. I smirked. "Yeah, that's what I thought." Then I turned around and walked away, leaving him standing there with nothing but his shame. Let him rot in it. I didn't go straight home after leaving my grandfather's house. I needed a moment to breathe, to let the weight of what had just happened settle in. But I didn't get that moment, because as soon as I checked my phone, I saw my family group chat was on fire. Apparently, word had spread fast. My mother had called my grandfather a disgusting old man in front of everyone. My aunts and uncles were furious. Some were in shock, some refused to believe it, and a few, the worst ones, were trying to downplay it. And then there was Grace. She had been texting people, begging them to listen to her side of the story, saying we had been struggling and that things just got out of control. She made herself sound like a victim. I scrolled through the messages, shaking my head. Then I saw the one that made me freeze. A message from my father. "John, your grandfather just called me. He's saying you threatened him. Call me now." I almost laughed. Threatened him? The only thing I did was let him sit in the mess he created. But now the old man was trying to flip the narrative. I stared at my phone, debating. Then I made my decision. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to burn every last bridge they had left. I didn't call my father right away. Instead, I did something better. I screenshotted every disgusting message between my grandfather and Grace. Every time-stamped meeting from the GPS tracker. Every phone log. Every lie. Then I forwarded it all to my dad. No words. No explanation. Just raw proof. Not even a minute later, my phone rang. "Dad." I picked up, keeping my voice calm. "Yeah." There was silence on the other end. Heavy breathing. Then finally he spoke. I didn't want to believe it. I clenched my jaw. "Well, now you don't have a choice." Another pause. "What did he say to you?" I smirked. "Oh, he played the victim. Said I threatened him." My dad let out a bitter laugh. "Of course he did." Then his tone turned serious. "John, listen to me. This family, this man, doesn't deserve your energy anymore. You don't owe him anything. You don't owe her anything. You walk away from this and never look back." I exhaled, nodding to myself. "Yeah, I know." There was another pause. Then my father's voice dropped. "But if you did threaten him, I wouldn't blame you." I actually laughed. For the first time in weeks. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt something other than rage. Relief. I wasn't alone. And neither was my grandfather. Because now, the entire family knew what he had done. And no one was ever going to look at him the same again. 2 days later, I got one last message from Grace. "I know you hate me, but please, can we talk? Just one last time." I stared at the message for a long time. Then, against my better judgment, I agreed. Not because I wanted to reconcile. Not because I wanted answers. But because I wanted to end this on my terms. The meeting. We met at a quiet cafe. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, looking like a ghost of the woman I used to love. Her face was pale, her hair was a mess, and her eyes were hollow. For a split second, I felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness. Just emptiness. She looked up, eyes searching mine. "John." I sat down, folding my hands on the table. "Say what you need to say." She swallowed hard. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I ruined everything. But I just want you to know that I never stopped loving you." I leaned back, tilting my head. Funny way of showing it. Tears welled up in her eyes. I was stupid. I was lost. And now I have nothing. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's what happens when you destroy your own life." She let out a shaky breath. "I don't expect you to take me back. She hesitated, voice breaking. "I just want to know, is there any chance that someday we could at least be friends?" I stared at her for a long time. Then, finally, I spoke. "No." Her face crumbled. I stood up, sliding my chair back. "You made your choice, Grace. Now you get to live with it." And with that, I walked away. Moving on. That was the last time I ever saw Grace. I filed for divorce the next day. She didn't fight it. She barely even responded. It was over in months. As for my grandfather, he became a pariah. My father cut him off completely. Half the family refused to speak to him. He lost everything, his reputation, his dignity, his place in the family. And me? I moved forward. Because, at the end of the day, revenge wasn't about making them suffer. It was about making sure they never had a place in my life again. And that was the best revenge of all.